The divorce papers had just been laid on the table. Before the sting of betrayal could even register, my ex-husband coldly pulled out his smartphone. He was utterly convinced my father was bankrupt. He called my dad, enunciating each word with force. "Mr. Prescott, you need to come pick up your troublesome daughter. If she's still here in an hour, don't blame me for what happens." I didn't cry in that moment. I just stared silently at the clock, knowing that it wasn't I who was about to be kicked out of this house, but his entire arrogant family. And I knew that the masterpiece my father had been meticulously crafting for so long was about to reach its grand finale. 5 years ago, I, Sophia Prescott, had a lavish wedding, the envy of everyone, with Ethan Miller. I was the only daughter of Richard Prescott, the CEO of the renowned real estate development firm, the Prescott Group. He was just a sales director at a mid-tier construction company. Despite the vast chasm between our family statuses, I loved him with a pure, guileless heart. On our wedding day, the greatest gift my parents gave us was this splendid, multi-million-dollar penthouse on Park Avenue. "This," my father said, "is your foundation, a home for you both to build your life upon." The deed was put in both our names, a tangible confirmation of the happiness we were meant to share. For the next few years, my life was a dream. Ethan was the perfect husband. I adored him, and he constantly surprised me with romantic gestures. He was also ambitious, climbing the corporate ladder quickly. My mother-in-law, Carol Miller, was initially suspicious of me, thinking a magnate's daughter wouldn't know the first thing about keeping a house. However, seeing her son receive so much support from my family, she began to treat me warmly. I considered myself the happiest woman in the world. I was content with my life as a homemaker, a pillar of support so my husband could focus on his career. I believed this happiness would last forever, but the storm was coming, a massive storm that would strip away all false pretenses. It was a few months ago, on a weekend evening, as the family was having a cheerful dinner, that I received a call from my father. I answered happily, "Hey, Dad, we're just having dinner." But what I heard wasn't his usual warm, energetic voice, but one that was weary, hoarse, and filled with despair. "Sophia, listen to me carefully. You need to stay calm." My heart sank. "Dad, what's wrong? Did something happen?" I heard a deep sigh on the other end. Dad's company is bankrupt. Chapter 11. Bankrupt. My ears were ringing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could the Prescott Group, a leader in the industry, go bankrupt? "Dad, you're kidding, right?" I stammered. "It's not a joke, honey." My father's voice sounded on the verge of tears. "I trusted the wrong people, poured everything into a ghost project and lost it all. The banks are breathing down my neck. I think I'll have to give up the house, the properties, everything to pay off the debts. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I can't do anything for you anymore." The smartphone slipped from my hand. Everything around me seemed to spin and crumble. Ethan and my mother-in-law looked at me, bewildered. "Sophia, what's wrong? What did your father say?" Ethan asked with concern. I couldn't answer. A lump formed in my throat. I could only shake my head as tears streamed down my face. Ethan quickly picked the phone up from the floor. The call was still connected. He put it to his ear, and I watched his expression shift, from concern to shock, then to horror. In a dead silence, he listened to the entire situation from my father. When the call ended, he placed the phone on the table. He didn't come over to comfort me. He just sat there, stiff as a statue. The way he looked at me was completely alien. A look I had never seen before. It no longer held love or affection, but a cold distance and ruthless calculation. Carol asked nervously, "Ethan, what is it? Is your father-in-law okay?" Ethan glanced at his mother, then at me, and finally spoke. His voice was dry, without a shred of emotion. "Sophia's family is ruined, Mom." My mother-in-law looked shocked for a moment but quickly composed herself. "Well, you all need to be strong and support your father." Those words gave me a sliver of comfort. That night's dinner ended in silence. I cried all night, sick with worry for my parents and anxious about our future. But amidst the pain, I held on to one certainty. Ethan, my husband, would stand by me. We would overcome this together. But I was wrong. I had no idea that the news of my family's bankruptcy was not just a tragedy for my husband and mother-in-law. It was a test that would reveal their true colors. And it was also the beginning of a cunning conspiracy to seize the very last thing I had left, this penthouse. The next morning, when I woke up with swollen eyes, the first harsh reality hit me. The change began to spread as clearly as an oil slick. The first to show her new attitude was my mother-in-law, Carol. Her former kindness and politeness were gone. The smile on her lips was replaced by a perpetual scowl and an expression of disgust. At breakfast, I was too heartbroken to eat, only managing a few bites of toast. She remarked sarcastically, Well, looks like Miss Prescott has gotten picky with her food lately. Don't like what this house has to offer anymore? Of course, you're used to 5-star meals. Now that your parents are broke and you have no one to lean on, I guess life has lost its flavor. I was frozen. Every word was a dagger twisting in my wound. Ethan muttered under his breath, Mom, what are you saying? Have I said anything untrue? Carol snapped at her son. I'm just speaking the truth. You used to go on and on about your father-in-law this, your father-in-law that. Now that he's a bankrupt old man, let's see if you can still show off. Then, pursing her lips at me, she said, Let me tell you something. This isn't a house you can just freeload in. Your husband works hard enough to support this family, and now it looks like he'll have to carry the weight of your family too. From now on, you better start acting like you belong. Stop wasting money on designer clothes. You'd better get used to being the daughter-in-law of a regular family. I was stunned. Just the day before, she had praised my taste in fashion. Now I was a burden, the daughter-in-law of a regular family. Unable to stand the tense atmosphere, Ethan stood up abruptly. I'm leaving for work. He didn't say a single word to defend me, not one word of comfort. He simply chose to flee, leaving me alone to face his mother's cruelty. From that day on, my life in that house became a living hell. I was no longer Sophia or Honey. I was treated like a maid. Carol started ordering me to do all sorts of chores. Sophia, clean the living room. It's so filthy I can't even look at it. Sophia, my laundry has been in the washing machine since this morning. Haven't you hung it up yet? Why is this soup so salty? Are you trying to kill me? All the work previously done by the housekeeper was now my responsibility. I tried to talk to Ethan. That night, I waited for him in the living room. Ethan, we need to talk. He was clearly trying to avoid me. I'm really tired. Whatever it is, can we talk tomorrow? No, it has to be now, I said firmly. Look at your mother's attitude lately. Don't you care how she's treating me? Ethan sighed heavily. You know my mom's personality. She's probably just worried about me, worried that I'm struggling. Besides, with what happened to your family, it's understandable she's on edge. Just have a little patience. You're her daughter-in-law. Is it that hard to humor her a bit? Patience? I couldn't believe my ears. You want me to endure these insults? I'm your wife, not the maid in this house. Enough, Ethan shouted. Maybe from the stress of work, or because he felt cornered. Please, don't make things worse. I have enough problems already. What do you want me to do? Fight with my own mother and tear this family apart? If you won't think about me, at least think about our home. With that, he stormed out again, leaving me choking on a mixture of anger and sorrow. I realized it then. He would never take my side. Between his mother and me, he had chosen his mother. Or more accurately, he had chosen himself and his own comfort. The days passed in a haze of humiliation and loneliness. The worry for my parents and the cold treatment from my in-laws were eating away at me. I grew noticeably thinner, and my face was perpetually grim. I thought about divorce, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I still loved him, and I clung to the faint hope that this was just a temporary hardship, that when this all passed, he would go back to being the husband I loved. But I didn't know that while I was clinging to patience and false hope, my husband and mother-in-law were plotting something far more cruel, a plan to snatch away my last and greatest asset. About a week after my family's catastrophe, one evening after another tense dinner, Ethan suddenly called me into his study. His demeanor was strange that day. Instead of his usual coldness and disdain, he was surprisingly gentle and considerate. "Sophia, come sit here," he said, patting the chair beside him. A little startled, I sat down cautiously. He poured me a glass of water and took my hand. "I know how hard it's been for you lately. I'm sorry. I was a fool for not comforting you. But don't worry. I've been thinking a lot, and no matter how difficult things get, I will never abandon you or your family." After so much coldness, his sweet words softened my wounded heart without me realizing it. The flame of hope flickered back to life. Maybe he really had seen the error of his ways, I thought. Look, he continued in a sincere voice, for the past few days, I've been meeting with partners and friends to find a way to help your father. But the debt is so large that a little help from my friends wouldn't be enough. He sighed deeply, his face etched with concern. But I've thought of a solution. It might be a bit risky, but right now, it's the only way for your father to get back on his feet. What solution? I asked eagerly, filled with hope. Ethan looked at me with eyes full of love. Our home, this penthouse, it's in both our names. I've been looking into it, and with the equity in this property, we can secure a very large home equity loan from the bank. We could get several $1,000,000. With that capital, your father could start over. He could rebuild his business. I froze. Mortgaging this house? It was our biggest asset, our home. As if reading my hesitation, Ethan squeezed my hand tighter. I know what you're worried about. I know this was a wedding gift from your father, but think about the situation we're in. Your father is in dire straits. How can we as his children just stand by and watch? Money can be lost and earned again, but family is priceless. His words were noble and righteous. He targeted my weakest point, my filial love and devotion to my parents. Don't worry, he continued, reassuring me. I've done all the calculations. We'll only take out a partial loan, just enough to give your father the capital he needs. With his ability and experience, he'll be able to pay back the principal and interest to the bank in a year or two. Our home will be safe. I'm doing this because I want to help you, because I want to ease your burden. He looked at me with such sincerity, the look of a husband willing to give everything for his wife's family. I, desperate with worry for my father, was completely won over. I believed him. I thought he had finally come to his senses and returned to being the husband I loved. So, what do I need to do? I asked. I've already prepared all the paperwork, Ethan said with a joyful expression. Since you're a co-owner, the bank needs signatures from both of us. You'll also need to sign a power of attorney so I can handle all the banking procedures. Tomorrow, you just need to take a moment to sign right here. He pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and placed it on the desk. With the thick pile of documents Ethan handed me in my hands, my mind was a whirlwind. On one hand, I was incredibly moved and grateful. When my family was on the brink of collapse, when I felt most alone and helpless, he wasn't a bystander but a husband, a pillar willing to weather the storm with me. His gesture seemed to erase all the bitterness and humiliation I had endured from him and his mother over the past month. Maybe I had misjudged him, I thought. Maybe he had his own struggles, pressured by his mother, but deep down, he was still the man who loved me, a responsible husband. His recent coldness was probably just due to the immense shock and worry. What's wrong, haven't you signed yet? Ethan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He looked at me with a flicker of impatience but quickly concealed it with a warm smile. Is there something you're worried about? Just trust me. I would never do anything to hurt you. Oh no, it's not that, I said, feeling guilty for ever doubting him. It's just there are so many papers. I don't understand much about these procedures. I started flipping through the pages. They were filled with dense legal jargon and numbers, loan applications, repayment plans, mortgage agreements, power of attorney documents. Everything looked very reasonable, just as he had explained. I tried to read more closely, but my mind was a chaotic mix of worry for my parents and gratitude for my husband's gesture. I couldn't focus. You don't need to read through all of it so meticulously, Ethan said in a tone that seemed urgent. These are all standard bank forms. They can't be changed. You just need to sign where I've marked. I have to submit them first thing in the morning. The appraiser is coming this afternoon. We need to move quickly so your father can get the money. He brought my father into it again. His haste, in my eyes, became a zeal to help his in-laws. He was rushing because he wanted to help my father as soon as possible. With that thought, the last shred of doubt in my mind vanished. I felt selfish and petty for questioning my husband's sincerity in this situation. Yes, okay, I'm sorry, I said, genuinely apologetic. I took the pen. He had carefully marked the signature lines with yellow sticky notes. I no longer read the text carefully. I just flipped to the marked pages and signed my name. My signature was clear and firm. I signed, placing all my faith and hope in this man. I had no idea. Among those innocuous papers hidden away was one fatal sheet waiting for my signature. I didn't see it. I signed my name to it, a signature that would seal my fate, turning me from the owner of this house into a destitute outcast. As soon as I finished signing, Ethan hastily gathered the documents and checked the signatures one more time. His face was beaming with joy. At that moment, I naively thought he was happy because he could help my family. "Done," he said, pulling me into a tight hug. "Don't worry, everything will be fine. I promise, your parents won't have to suffer anymore." I hugged him back, shedding tears of emotion. At that moment, I believed I had my old husband back. I believed that even if our family crumbled, I had the strongest pillar in him. I didn't know I was living in a false happiness. I naively believed the storm had truly passed. I thought Ethan's love had overcome all material calculations. I didn't realize that this was just the executioner's final kindness before the axe fell, the calm before a storm that would devastate everything. And that storm arrived on a weekend afternoon. That evening, I prepared a lavish dinner with all of Ethan's favorite dishes. I wanted to thank him for everything he had done for my family. When he came home from work, I ran happily to greet him, but what I received wasn't his usual warm smile. His face was as cold as ice, and the look he gave me was strange and contemptuous. "Ethan, what's wrong?" I asked, concerned. He didn't answer. He walked right past me and went straight to the living room. There, his mother, Carol, was already sitting, waiting for him with an impassive expression. "Sit down," Ethan said in a dry voice. "We need to talk." I had a bad feeling. My heart started pounding. I sat cautiously on the opposite sofa. Ethan didn't beat around the bush. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and tossed it onto the coffee table with a thud. "Sign it." With trembling hands, I picked up the papers. The moment 2 words printed in bold jumped out at me, I felt my whole world explode. Divorce petition. I was frozen. My ears were ringing. Divorce? Why divorce? "Ethan, you're kidding, right?" I stammered, unable to believe my eyes. "Why? Why so suddenly? What did I do wrong?" Ethan laughed, a laugh that, in hindsight, was incredibly fake and terrifying. "You didn't do anything wrong. I just don't love you anymore. Our lives are too different. I can't keep living with a woman who's dragging the weight of a family like yours behind her. The weight of a family." Just a week ago, he had promised we would bear it together, and now... Tears started to well up. "No, this can't be. There must be a misunderstanding. Ethan, look at me. It's me, Sophia." But he didn't look at me. He stared coldly at the papers. "Sign it. Don't waste my time." It was then that my mother-in-law spoke. Her voice was no longer gentle but laced with contempt. "Still don't get it after everything he's told you?" she said scornfully. "Look at yourself. Your parents are broke. You're not a rich kid anymore. Do you think my son is stupid enough to keep carrying a burden like you? The only reason he stayed with you these past few years was because of your family. Now that your family is finished, so is your relationship. It's that simple." Every word was a knife stabbing into my bleeding heart. So that was it. All the love he had professed was a calculation. He was only by my side because of my title as the CEO's daughter. And now that the title was gone, he intended to discard me like a useless object. "Scum!" I screamed. "You are human trash." "Who are you calling trash?" she screeched back. "You should be grateful my son put up with you for the last 5 years. Just sign the papers and get out of my sight." I looked at Ethan with pleading eyes. "Ethan, please don't do this to me. We can work through anything together. But not divorce. Please." But the man I had loved with all my heart replied coldly, "It's too late, Sophia. My feelings for you died the day I found out your family was ruined. Either you sign or I'll see you in court." His words were like a hammer blow, shattering my last hope, my last illusion. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the divorce papers and sobbing uncontrollably. I had been deceived in the most cruel and absolute way. The man I loved most turned out to be a demon, a con artist wearing a mask of love. He and his mother had put on a play together, a play to use me, exploit me, and finally abandon me without mercy. I cried until my tears ran dry, but in the midst of that extreme pain, a cold rage began to boil inside me. It was my mistake to believe in love, but I would not let them continue to trample on me. I wiped my tears and shot to my feet. I grabbed the pen and signed my name on the divorce petition, a signature without hesitation. Signed. Fine. Let's get a divorce. Ethan and his mother seemed a little surprised by my change in attitude. I continued in a firm voice, "This house was a gift from my father. Even if we divorce, I'm not going anywhere. This is still my house." Hearing my words, Ethan and Carol looked at each other and burst out laughing, a laugh full of contempt and pity. "Your house?" Ethan said, laughing until he had tears in his eyes. "Sophia, you're so naive it's pathetic. Do you really think any part of this house will be left for you after the divorce?" He walked over, pulled another folder from his briefcase, and threw it in front of me. "See for yourself. Whose signature is this?" With trembling hands, I picked up the document and felt the world collapse once more. It was a quitclaim deed, transferring my interest in the property, and below, my signature was clearly written. It was then that I realized the stack of papers I had signed, the trap I had walked into with my own 2 hands. "You tricked me!" I screamed, lunging at him like a wild animal. But he easily pushed me away, and I fell clumsily to the floor. "Tricked you? More like you were too stupid," he said, looking down at me with the eyes of a victor. "Who can you blame now? After signing a document with your own hand, gifting your share of the house to your husband? This house is now mine alone. You don't get a single cent." I collapsed onto the floor, completely broken. I had lost everything. I had lost my husband, my faith, and now, even my home. I had been cheated in the most brutal way imaginable. The days leading up to the court date were a living hell. I was living in my own home but treated like a prisoner. I was seen as a nuisance to be disposed of as quickly as possible. Ethan and his mother no longer bothered with pretenses. They openly criticized and insulted me. They would deliberately talk loudly about how they would redecorate the house after kicking out the dead weight, or how they would invite friends over to celebrate being free of the burden. Every word was like 1,000 needles piercing my bleeding heart. I contacted several law firms for help, but when I told them my story and admitted that I had signed the quitclaim deed with my own hand, they all shook their heads with looks of helplessness. "It's going to be tough," one older lawyer told me. "The document is clear and properly notarized. Unless you have hard evidence of fraud or duress like an audio or video recording, the chances of overturning this are practically zero. The court only rules on evidence." Evidence? Where was I going to get evidence? Everything had happened between Ethan and me, and his sweet words and kind gestures were all an act, a performance that had left no trace. I was at a dead end. I felt so stupid, so naive. How could I have fallen for such a crude trap? How could I have signed documents without reading them carefully? I blamed and reproached myself, but the self-reproach soon turned to anger. It wasn't my fault. It was their fault. It was the fault of those people who had used my love and trust to weave such a vile plot. I decided to go to court, even if I lost. I had to stand before the law and tell the whole truth in my own voice. Even if no one believed me, I had to show the world their true faces. The court date was set. I went to the courthouse alone, without a lawyer or family. I didn't dare tell my parents the truth. They were already suffering enough from the bankruptcy. I didn't want to worry them more. I lied, telling them Ethan and I were having a small conflict and needed some time apart. When I entered the courtroom, I saw Ethan and his mother sitting there. They weren't alone. Beside them sat a sharp, confident-looking lawyer. Seeing me alone, they looked at me with even more scorn and self-assurance. They were certain of their victory. The hearing was swift. For me, it was almost a form of torture. Ethan's lawyer presented his arguments clearly and eloquently. He stated that our marriage had broken down due to irreconcilable differences in background and thinking. And then, with a triumphant air, he played his winning card, the quitclaim deed, with my signature. "Your Honor," he said with feigned solemnity, "as for the assets, we have no dispute. In consideration of their marital affection and in gratitude for the care my client's family provided her during a difficult time, my client's wife, Miss Sophia Prescott, chose to gift her entire share of the penthouse to her husband, Mr. Ethan Miller. All procedures are legal and have been duly notarized." A choking rage rose in my throat. His words twisted the truth shamelessly. Gratitude? Care? They had turned me from a victim of a scam into a sympathetic wife. "That's not true," I shouted, jumping to my feet, unable to contain myself any longer. "It's all lies. They tricked me. I didn't know anything about that document. He deceived me. He told me they were papers for a bank loan to help my father. They forced me to sign. But the judge just looked at me with a pitying expression. Please calm down, Miss Prescott. The signature on the document is yours, is it not? I looked at the signature projected on the screen. It was, without a doubt, my signature. I couldn't deny it. But I didn't know the contents. I stammered, sobbing. They tricked me. Please believe me, Your Honor. Do you have any proof of fraud or duress? Ethan's lawyer retorted. A challenging question, a dagger twisting in my powerlessness. Proof. Where was I going to get proof? Everything had happened between him and me, and his sweet words had vanished like smoke, leaving no trace. I was helpless. I could only stand there, crying and repeating desperately, They tricked me. It's unfair. Please believe me. But my tears were worthless against the black and white of the paper. Ethan and his mother sat there, watching my suffering. There wasn't a shred of compassion in their eyes, only the victor's elation. Finally, the hearing was over. The judge struck the gavel. The sharp sound was like the final nail in the coffin of my marriage and my faith. After reviewing the evidence presented, he read the verdict in a flat voice. This court recognizes the quitclaim deed between Miss Sophia Prescott and Mr. Ethan Miller as a fully legal and notarized contract. Ms. Prescott has not presented any evidence of fraud or duress. Therefore, the court grants Mr. Ethan Miller's petition for divorce. Regarding the assets, the penthouse at the aforementioned address is confirmed to be the sole property of Mr. Ethan Miller. I fell back into my chair. My ears were ringing, and everything went dark. I had lost. I had lost spectacularly. I had lost to my naivety and my blind faith. I had lost. Justice was not on my side. But I couldn't accept it. I just couldn't accept this harsh reality. I didn't go to my parents' house. I didn't want them to see me in this miserable state. I had nowhere else to go. Aimlessly, I took a cab back to that penthouse. What was once my home was now the battlefield where I had been defeated. When I arrived, Ethan and his mother had just gotten back as well. But amidst the pain and despair, a feeling of anger and rebellion began to grow. No, I couldn't give up like this. That house was my house. I wasn't going anywhere. I wouldn't let them take everything from me so easily. I would stay and fight until the very end. Even if I was alone, even if I had to use the most extreme methods. I stumbled out of the courthouse, my mind a blank. The sky outside was gray, and a cold, fine rain was falling, mirroring my soul. I had lost. Justice wasn't on my side, but I couldn't accept it. I just couldn't accept this brutal reality. I didn't go to my parents' place. I didn't want them to see me so broken. I had nowhere else to go. Aimlessly, I hailed a cab and returned to that penthouse, what was once my home, now the battlefield of my defeat. When I arrived, Ethan and his mother were just getting back too. Seeing me, Carol curled her lip in a sneer. Why did you crawl back here? The judge already made his ruling. This isn't your house anymore. Didn't you hear? Are you deaf? Get lost. The sight of you makes me sick. I walked into the house without a word and went straight up to my room. I wasn't going anywhere. This house was a gift from my parents. It might not be mine on paper anymore, but morally, I was still its owner. As I refused to leave, Ethan came up and blocked my doorway. What are you doing? Are you planning to squat here? Yes, I said, lifting my head and looking him straight in the eye. For the first time, my gaze was defiant. This house belongs to my parents. It's the fruit of their blood, sweat, and tears. I'm not going anywhere. If I have to die, I'll die in this house. I won't let con artists like you have it so easily. You, who are you calling a con artist? Carol shrieked, rushing up from behind and pointing a finger in my face. If the shoe fits, wear it, I replied, my voice as cold as ice. My stubborn and defiant attitude infuriated them, but since they had just come from court, they didn't dare do anything drastic. Fine, Ethan sneered. If you want to stay, stay, but don't expect to live comfortably. Let's see how long you can last. It was the third day I had held out in my room. His patience had likely run out because Ethan no longer seemed willing to play games. He pounded on my door. Sophia, get out here right now. I didn't answer. You're not coming out? You want me to break down the door? I knew with his temper he was perfectly capable of it. I took a deep breath and opened the door. He stood there with his arms crossed, looking down at me arrogantly. "You still haven't left? You're really going to stay here so shamelessly? Let me tell you something, Sophia. Your bankrupt family is no match for us. You'd better leave quietly. Don't make me hurt you." I just stared at him in silence. My silence seemed to enrage him further. "Fine. You asked for it." He pulled out his smartphone and dialed a number I would never forget. My father's number. "Hello, am I speaking to my father-in-law?" he said into the phone. His tone was full of contempt and defiance. He put it on speakerphone, deliberately, so that both I and his mother, who was standing nearby, could hear. "It's Ethan. I'm calling with some good news. Your darling daughter? As of today, she's no longer my wife. We just got divorced." There was silence on the other end. I could imagine my father's shock and pain. My heart clenched, but Ethan didn't stop. He laughed cruelly. "Oh, but I'm not just calling to share the news. Sorry to bother you, but could you come and pick up your troublesome daughter? She's holed up in my house and has no intention of leaving. Says she'd rather die here. What a great upbringing you gave her. Even taught her how to be a freeloader in someone else's house." Clang. I heard something break on the other end. It was probably the teacup my father always held. "What did you just say?" My father's voice trembled with rage. "I said, come and get her," Ethan roared like a wild animal. "My house isn't a charity for the daughter of a washed-up old man like you. I'll give you 1 hour. If she's still here in an hour, don't blame me if I have someone drag her out onto the street. Goodbye." He hung up and threw the phone on the table. He turned to me with a triumphant smile. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, but this time they weren't tears of helplessness. They were tears of profound rage. He had not only insulted me, but my parents, the people I love most in this world. He had crossed my final line. I was wrong. Stubbornly staying here was pointless. It only gave them more excuses to hurt my loved ones. "Come pick up your troublesome daughter." Ethan's words echoed in my head, sharp as 1,000 shards of glass, tearing my heart to shreds. He had not only insulted me, but my parents, the people I cherished most. He had trampled on the last shred of pride my family and I had left. In that instant, I felt everything inside me shatter. Faith, love, even the last ounce of strength I had to protect what I called a family, it all vanished like smoke. I stood in the middle of the lavish living room, sobbing uncontrollably. Rage, pain, and a suffocating helplessness washed over me. I was wrong. Resisting in this house was futile. I thought staying was a fight for justice, for the gift my parents had given me. But no, it only gave them more ammunition to hurt the ones I loved. How devastated my father must have been to hear those words. He had lost his life's work, and now he had to endure unspeakable insults from his ex-son-in-law. I didn't want to imagine it. I felt so useless. Such a terrible daughter. Ethan and his mother stood there, watching me with their arms crossed and triumphant expressions. They were waiting for me to break down completely, to pack my bags and leave in humiliation. "Why haven't you left yet?" Ethan said with a mocking smile. "Or are you waiting for your daddy to actually show up? That wouldn't be so bad." He could see with his own eyes how his precious daughter gets thrown out onto the street. Maybe then he'll regret not raising her better. Every word from his mouth was torture. I couldn't bear it anymore. In my despair and extreme pain, I could no longer think clearly. As a reflex, I grabbed my smartphone and, with trembling hands, dialed my father's number. I didn't know why I was calling. Maybe I just wanted to hear his voice. Maybe I was looking for a shred of comfort. Or maybe I just wanted to apologize for putting him through this humiliation. The phone was answered on the first ring. "Dad, it's me." My voice broke, unable to form words. It felt like the whole world was filled with nothing but my weeping. "Sophia, don't cry." My father's voice on the other end showed none of the anger or confusion I expected. On the contrary, his voice was incredibly calm and composed, with a strange strength. "Dad knows everything." I froze. All the pain inside me seemed to stop for an instant. "Dad, you—" "Don't worry," my father interrupted. "I recorded everything that scoundrel said. My girl, you've suffered a lot. You did very well. You were very brave." My father's voice was no longer the tired, helpless voice of a bankrupt man. It was deep and full of authority, as if a lion, long silent, had finally awakened. "Now listen to me carefully. His voice was firm, allowing no argument. "Don't go anywhere. Stay in that house. Don't take a single step out the door, no matter what they say or do. If you have to, lock your bedroom door. Understand?" "Yes. Yes, I understand," I replied, still dazed, not understanding what my father was planning. Why was he so calm? Why was he telling me to stay? "Good, stay put. I'll be there in 30 minutes. But what are you going to do when you get here?" I asked worriedly. "He and his mother are here. They're very aggressive. They'll insult you. Trust your father." That was all he said. 3 words, but they carried the weight of a ton. In an instant, all my confusion vanished, replaced by an absolute faith. He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand. My father was coming in 30 minutes. What was he planning? How could a ruined man with nothing face such arrogant people? Was he coming to beg them for my sake? No, that couldn't be it. My father's voice wasn't that of someone coming to plead. It was the voice of someone coming to deliver justice. Ethan and his mother, seeing my stunned expression after the call, gloated even more. "What? You tattled to your daddy?" Ethan mocked. "Let's see what that broke old man can do when he gets here. Is he going to come and kneel to apologize for his daughter? That would be a sight to see." "Don't waste your breath on her," Carol said, heading to the kitchen with disdain. Let him come. Let him come and take this nuisance away." What a relief. I'll have some tea while I enjoy the show. With that, she leisurely went to the kitchen. Ethan flopped onto the sofa, crossed his legs, and turned on a sports channel, completely ignoring my presence. They were enjoying their last moments of arrogance, unaware that a giant tsunami was about to crash down and wash away all their hubris and dirty schemes. I said nothing. I went silently up to my bedroom and, as my father had instructed, locked the door. I didn't pack. I just went to the window, pulled the curtain aside slightly, and looked down at the street. I waited. For 30 minutes. The 30 minutes of destiny that would decide the future of my family and theirs. I was no longer afraid. Instead, I felt a strange excitement, as if I was about to witness something extraordinary. Exactly 30 minutes later, I started to hear a distant rumble. The roar of car engines grew louder and louder until it stopped right in front of our building. I held my breath and peered out the window. A motorcade had appeared. It wasn't the old taxi or scooter that Ethan and his mother might have imagined. Leading the way was a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom, a car I could never mistake the same car my father used for meetings with his most important partners. The late afternoon sun glinted off its luxurious black paint. Following it were 2 black Mercedes S-Class sedans, and bringing up the rear was a large black Escalade, the kind used for security details. When the motorcade stopped, it took up the entire street, creating an imposing and authoritative scene. Downstairs, Ethan and his mother also heard the noise and came out onto the balcony out of curiosity. When they saw the line of cars, the smiles on their faces froze. They looked at each other in bewilderment, not understanding what was happening. They probably thought some big shot had gotten the wrong address. The door of the Rolls-Royce opened, and a man in a black suit and sunglasses got out. It was Mr. Alonso, my father's most trusted head of security. He politely walked around the car to open the rear door, and then, my father stepped out. He was wearing a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, and on his wrist gleamed the limited edition Patek Philippe watch I had given him for his last birthday. His hair was impeccably styled, and his shoes shone. He looked nothing like a ruined man drowning in debt. He was majestic and imposing, like an emperor returning to his kingdom. From the other cars emerged our family's lawyer, Mr. Jennings, and a team of nearly a dozen bodyguards, all tall and well-built, in black uniforms that made them look intensely professional. From my bedroom window, I watched the scene, speechless with shock, and then I burst into tears. But this time, they were tears of happiness and overwhelming emotion. Dad. My father wasn't bankrupt. It had all been an act. Downstairs, Ethan and his mother were also on the balcony, stunned. The color drained from their faces, shifting from arrogance to confusion and then to extreme panic. They weren't fools. They were beginning to realize they had walked into a trap. The security team quickly fanned out, securing the area around the entrance. My father and Mr. Jennings walked calmly into the building, through the main door that Ethan, in his arrogance, had forgotten to lock after insulting me. I quickly unlocked my bedroom door, wiped my tears, and hurried downstairs. When I got there, my father and Mr. Jennings had just entered the living room. "Dad!" I cried out, overwhelmed with joy and shock. My father turned to me. His stern gaze softened for an instant. He walked over, opened his arms, and held me tightly. "My girl," he said, patting my trembling back. "I'm sorry for putting you through this. It's all over now." My father's embrace, that firm, warm hug, washed away all the humiliation and pain I had suffered. I felt safe. Ethan and Carol then stumbled down the stairs. They stood at the top, staring at the scene. Their faces were as white as paper, and their legs were shaking. Mr. Prescott," Ethan stammered, his voice no longer arrogant, but filled with terror. How did you get here? Your company." My father released me and turned to face them. His gentle expression vanished, replaced by a gaze as cold and sharp as a razor, a look that seemed to pierce right through their souls. "My company?" he sneered, a laugh full of sarcasm. "Thank you for your concern. It's doing very well. In fact, we just closed a massive deal in Dubai this morning." "What? What are you saying?" Carol shrieked, disbelieving. "Impossible! You're lying! You're bankrupt! You said so yourself!" "Yes, I said so myself," my father admitted calmly. "But it wasn't bad news. It was a test to see the true nature of people. A test." I froze. Ethan and Carol were equally horrified. "A test?" Carol's voice was filled with disbelief. It seemed she still couldn't accept that she had been tricked. My father, as if she wasn't even worth a reply, sat down calmly on the sofa in the exact same spot where, just minutes before, Ethan had sat arrogantly with his legs crossed. My father motioned for me to sit beside him. His relaxed demeanor was that of a king in his own palace. Mr. Jennings wasted no time. He walked to the glass coffee table and opened his briefcase. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," he said in a polite but emotionless voice. "I believe it's time you learned the whole truth, Mr." Jennings pulled out a dark blue-bound folder and placed it on the table. "This is the original property agreement, drafted on the wedding day of Mr. Ethan Miller and Miss Sophia Prescott 5 years ago. Mr. Ethan Miller's Richard Prescott, as the bride's father, gifted this multi-million-dollar penthouse as a shared marital asset." "Yes, so what?" Carol retorted, the veins in her neck bulging. She seemed to have regained some courage at the mention of her evidence. "But Sophia signed a document, a quitclaim deed, gifting her entire share to my son. This house is now the sole property of Ethan. The court ruled on it. We have a clear document. How dare you try to overturn it?" she said confidently, clinging to her legal victory. Mr. Jennings smiled, a smile mixed with pity and sarcasm. "Ma'am, don't be so hasty. That court victory is likely only temporary. Would you mind carefully reading the final clause of this original agreement? Article 9, Section 3. He pointed to a line printed in very small font at the bottom of the last page, a spot easily missed if one didn't read carefully. Ethan and Carol leaned forward hurriedly, squinting to read. Their once confident faces turned from red to white, then to a pale blue. Mr. Jennings, giving them no time to process, read it aloud, his voice clear as a judge, delivering a sentence. Special Provision 9.3. The property in question is hereby placed into a revocable trust, the Miller-Prescott Residence Trust, for the sole benefit of the married couple, Ethan Miller and Sophia Prescott. The grantor and sole trustee of this trust is Richard Prescott. This trust, and all property titles associated with it, shall remain legally valid only so long as the beneficiaries, Ethan Miller and Sophia Prescott, maintain a legally valid marital relationship. In the event the marital relationship is terminated for any reason, including divorce or the death of either party, this trust shall automatically dissolve. Any subsequent transfer, gift, sale, mortgage, or other encumbrance placed upon said property without the express written and notarized consent of the original grantor, Richard Prescott, shall be considered null and void. The property will automatically revert to the full ownership of the Prescott Group, LLC. Null and void? Carol stammered, her voice breaking. She swayed and had to grab her son's arm to keep from falling. "That's right, ma'am," Mr. Jennings said, his voice like ice. "To put it simply, that quitclaim deed that Mr. Miller holds, the one you treasure so much, became legally worthless the moment he and Miss Sophia were officially divorced. It's just a piece of paper now." "No, impossible!" Ethan screamed, completely losing his composure. "This is a trap. You set us up. Who's ever heard of such an absurd clause? What law allows this?" Mr. Jennings smiled again. "Mr. Miller, I see you're not well versed in contract law. This is a perfectly legal provision within a revocable trust. When you and Miss Sophia accepted this gift, you accepted its conditions. You can't claim ignorance now. Furthermore, at the time, your own lawyer reviewed this agreement and confirmed there were no legal issues." Ethan was stunned. He remembered the day he signed the contract. He was so euphoric about receiving such a massive gift from his father-in-law that he paid no attention to the fine print. He had walked right into the trap with his own 2 feet, an incredibly well-calculated legal trap. "What about the court's ruling?" Carol asked, trying to cling to her last hope. "The court ruled that this house belongs to my son." "The trial court's ruling was based on the evidence presented at that time," Mr. Jennings explained calmly. "At that time, we did not present this original trust agreement. Why? Because we wanted to see just how far your little show would go. Now, we have sufficient proof of Mr. Miller's fraudulent intent, plus this original trust document. We will be filing an appeal, and I guarantee you, 100%, that the appellate court's ruling will be entirely different. Mr. Miller will not only lose the house, but he could also face charges for fraud and misappropriation of assets." Ethan and his mother completely fell apart. They looked at each other, then at my father, with expressions of sheer horror. They had been trapped. A trap set 5 years ago and sprung at the perfect moment. They were too arrogant. They underestimated us. And now they had to taste the bitterest defeat. When Mr. Jennings finished his explanation, a heavy silence fell over the living room. Ethan and his mother slumped onto the sofa, their eyes vacant, not a trace of their former arrogance left. They had lost, spectacularly. My father, who had watched everything in silence, finally stood up. His gaze wasn't that of a victor. In his eyes, there was only disappointment and a deep sadness. "Ethan," he began, his voice deep and authoritative, "I once trusted you. I thought you were an ambitious, talented young man, and most importantly, that you sincerely loved my daughter. I didn't hesitate to give you my most precious child in marriage, and I gave you a fortune to build your lives on. I hoped you would create a happy family with Sophia, and that eventually you would help me run this business." He shook his head, disappointed. "After a few years of observation, if I felt you had truly matured, I planned to entrust you with a major part of the Prescott Group, a position you probably never even dreamed of. And this bankruptcy charade was my final test for you." Hearing that, not just Ethan and Carol, but I too, was stunned. A final test. My father looked at me with an apologetic expression. "Sophia, I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but I had to. I needed to know if the man you chose, the man I was about to entrust with my daughter's future and my entire legacy, was truly trustworthy." He turned his gaze back to Ethan. "I wanted to see your true nature when my daughter was no longer a rich man's child, when her family collapsed, when she became a burden. I wanted to see if, as you vowed on your wedding day, you would stand by her side and overcome hardship together, or if—" My father didn't finish the sentence, but we all understood. "I gave you a chance." His voice became firm. "A chance to prove yourself as a man, as a husband, but you have disappointed me profoundly. You not only showed your greed and treachery, but you abandoned your wife in her moment of greatest pain, and even cooked up a vile scheme with your mother to steal her last asset. You don't deserve to be my daughter's husband. You don't deserve to inherit anything from me." My father's words were the final judgment, slamming shut every door to Ethan's future. It was then that he realized what he had lost. Not just a penthouse, but an immense fortune, a giant business, and a brilliant future. He had thrown it all away for his own greed and short-sightedness. He looked up at my father and me. He dropped to his knees before my father. "Sir, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he sobbed, tears of a belated regret. I was possessed. Greed blinded me. Please forgive me just this once. I promise I'll change. I'll treat Sophia right. Please, don't kick us out." Carol, seeing her son, scrambled to kneel beside him. "That's right, Richard," she wailed miserably. "It's all my fault. It was me, in my old age and foolishness, who incited my son. Please, think of the young couple. of the 5 years they lived as husband and wife, and forgive us this one time. We are truly sorry." They started another tearful performance, but this time it had no effect. My father just looked at them coldly. "Forgiveness? If the person who came here today wasn't me, but a truly bankrupt old man, would you be saying these words? Or would you have insulted that old man to his face and thrown his daughter onto the street without mercy?" They were speechless at my father's question. "I gave you the chance, but you threw it away with your own hands," my father said to Ethan. "There's nothing more to discuss." Ethan remained kneeling on the cold marble floor, but he was no longer crying or begging. He lifted his head and looked at us, at my father and me. His eyes no longer held remorse, but the empty, desperate look of someone who had lost everything. He started mumbling as if he had lost his mind. "A test. It was a test. The bankruptcy was fake." He let out a dry, crazed laugh. "Ha ha ha ha. So that's what it was. It was all a play to test my heart. You treated me like a lab rat, and now you're enjoying the show, watching me fall into your trap." "We didn't see you as a rat," my father said, his voice glacial. "You turned yourself into one, chasing the bait in front of you, blind to the trap hanging over your head." Carol, after a moment of being dazed, regained her senses, but her mind had twisted into a demonic fury. She was no longer crying or begging. She leaped to her feet and pointed a finger at my father's face. The hypocritical, gentle mask had fallen away completely, leaving only shamelessness and greed. "You're a real piece of work, Richard Prescott," she shrieked, beside herself. "Because you have money and power, you can do whatever you want. Play games, testing people with your daughter and your fortune. You think we're your toys?" "Yes, my son was wrong. His mistake was not being as ruthless and cruel as you." She turned to her son. "Ethan, get up! What are you doing just sitting there? You did nothing wrong. Your only mistake was being too kind and trusting people." After living with this old man's daughter for 5 years, treating her like a princess, now his whole family gangs up to throw you out. Are you still going to kneel before these people? I couldn't believe my ears. Even in this situation, she could twist the truth, shamelessly confusing black and white. In her mouth, her son had become the victim, and we were the cruel executioners. "Mrs. Miller," Mr. Jennings intervened then. His voice was still calm but sharp. "I suggest you watch your words. Who served whom, and who was in the wrong, is something you know better than anyone. And I'll remind you once again, legally, this house was never your son's property." "Shut up!" Carol started insulting the lawyer. "You're nothing but a hired gun for that old man. The papers say Sophia gifted the house to my son. The court ruled on it. You think you can just overturn it?" She was desperately clinging to the erroneous trial court ruling like a drowning person to a piece of driftwood. My father just shook his head slightly, his face showing clear disappointment. He seemed unwilling to argue further with a woman who had lost her mind. But Ethan, he seemed to be spurred on by his mother's words. His despair turned to anger. He got to his feet and stared at my father. His eyes no longer held fear, but a crazed defiance. "She's right," he said, his voice hoarse. "She's right. I failed your test, but don't celebrate too soon. The court ruled that this house is mine. Even with your strange clause, the court's ruling still stands. You want to appeal? It won't be easy. I'll see you in appellate court. Let's see if your money can beat the simple logic of black and white." He was even threatening us. He believed that with the ruling he had in hand, he still had a chance. Greed had completely blinded him. He didn't know who he was up against. I looked at the man before me, the man I once loved. Only bitterness remained in my heart. He felt not the slightest remorse. He had chosen to fight to the bitter end. My father looked from Ethan to Carol. He wasn't angry at all. He just smiled coldly. "Fine, if that's what you want." He turned to the lawyer. "Mr. Jennings, I don't think we'll need to wait for the appeal. Show them the last gift I prepared for them." The last gift. I was surprised too. Mr. Jennings nodded and opened his briefcase again, but this time what he took out wasn't a folder, but a tablet. He played a video, set it on the table, and turned the screen toward Ethan and his mother. On the screen was footage from a hidden camera installed in the private room of a high-end restaurant, and the star of the video was none other than Ethan. He was talking to an unknown man. Ethan's voice was crystal clear. "Don't worry. If you handle the matter in court properly, get the ruling in my favor. As soon as I have the penthouse, I'll sell it immediately." We'll split the proceeds as we agreed, 60 for me, 40 for you." The other man laughed. "Are you sure? I hear your father-in-law is no small fry." "That geezer is nothing but a broke old man now," Ethan sneered. "And his daughter is so stupid, she does whatever I say. I've got this completely under control." When the video ended, the living room was silent again. But this time, it was a deathly silence. Carol looked at her son, her eyes wide with disbelief. It turned out her son had not only deceived his wife, but had dared to collude with a judicial official, trying to buy justice with money. And Ethan, his face was drained of all color. He stared at the tablet, trembling from head to toe. "How did you get this?" he stammered. "You thought I didn't have the same connections as you?" my father said, his voice glacial. "The man you met with was a trap I set myself. I just wanted to see how low you would go, and you didn't disappoint." The extreme shock caused Ethan to completely break down. He had not only failed, but his dirtiest scheme had been completely exposed. There was no escape. "Your actions," Mr. Jennings said, his voice firm as if reading an indictment, "not only constitute fraud and misappropriation, but there is also evidence of the felony crime of bribery. With this video and the testimony of the man who posed as a court officer, how many years in prison do you think you're looking at, Mr. Miller?" Ethan collapsed to the floor, covering his face with his hands. He didn't even have the courage to look up. He had lost all will to resist, and the fear of prison had completely taken over his mind. Carol, after the terrible shock, no longer dared to scream. She looked at her son, then at my father. Her eyes were filled with terror and desperation. It was then she realized they had walked into a lion's den. She staggered over and knelt before my father. All her pride and arrogance were gone, leaving only the misery of someone begging for mercy. Mr. Prescott, please, I'm begging you," she wailed, her voice broken. "It's all my fault. It was me, in my stupidity, who incited my son. Please forgive us this one time. He's my only son. If he goes to prison, I won't be able to live. Please, please have mercy." My father just looked at her coldly. "Mercy, Mrs. Miller. When your son deceived my daughter, did you think of that word? When you and your son were gloating after stealing her assets, did you think a day like today would come? And when your son mercilessly insulted me, calling me a broke old man, did you think you would have to beg that same old man?" Every question from my father was a dagger piercing her heart, and she lowered her head even further, unable to answer. "Dad," I called out softly. A part of me felt uneasy. My father turned to me, his gaze softening. "Sophia, don't get soft. If you don't kill the snake, it will come back to bite you one day. This time, we have to pull it out by the roots." With that, he didn't look at the mother and son again. He motioned to Mr. Jennings. Mr. Jennings nodded and took another document from his briefcase. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," he said. "Mr. Prescott, after much consideration, has decided to offer you one last way out." At the words, "way out," both Ethan and his mother looked up, a spark of hope in their eyes. "We will not press criminal charges for Mr. Miller's attempted bribery. On one condition," Mr. Jennings said, placing the document on the table. "You will sign this affidavit. The contents are simple. You both voluntarily waive all rights to appeal the court's decision, and at the same time, you acknowledge that this penthouse is the property of the Prescott Group. Furthermore, you pledge to never again appear in Miss Sophia Prescott's life, nor to contact or interfere with her in any way." He paused and added in a chilling voice, "If you agree to sign, we will pretend none of this happened. But if you don't, that video will be sent immediately to the district attorney's office. It wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum. Sign and lose the house in exchange for freedom, or don't sign and go to prison." Ethan didn't have to think. He hastily grabbed the pen and with a trembling hand signed his name on the affidavit. Carol also got up unsteadily and, following her son, signed with a shaky hand. When they finished signing, Mr. Jennings carefully put the affidavit back in his briefcase. "Good," my father said. "Now for the final step." He stood up, walked to the door, and motioned to the security team waiting outside. "Come in." A dozen bodyguards in black uniforms entered in unison and formed two lines. Their presence made the air in the room heavy. "Mr. Jennings," my father said, "read them the rest of the ultimatum." The lawyer nodded. At the request of the legal owner of this penthouse, Mrs. Carol Miller and her son, Mr. Ethan Miller, are required to vacate this property within 1 hour. You may only take your essential personal belongings. All assets and furniture in the house are the property of the Prescott Group. My father turned to the head of security. Mr. Alonso, have your men assist Mrs. Miller and Mr. Miller with their packing. Remember, only personal effects, clothes, shoes, things like that. The rest stays. If they are not gone in 1 hour, you will kindly escort them out. Understood, sir. And so began the most humiliating eviction. Under Mr. Alonso's direction, the security team split into 2 groups. One group escorted Ethan and his mother upstairs, while the other brought in large boxes and began packing. They moved with professional speed. The clothes in Ethan and Carol's closets were pulled out and thrown into the boxes. Shoes, handbags, cosmetics all met the same fate, without the slightest respect, without the slightest compassion. Carol watched as her prized luxury items were treated like trash. Her face was ashen. She tried to intervene, but 2 bodyguards stood in her way with glacial stares. Sorry, ma'am. Mr. Prescott's orders. Ethan just stood in a corner as if rooted to the spot. He had no strength left to resist. This eviction took place before my eyes and those of curious neighbors peeking out their doors. The rumor that Mr. Miller's house was being ransacked by thugs spread like wildfire. Exactly 1 hour later, all of Ethan and Carol's personal belongings were neatly packed into a few boxes. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller, your time is up, Mr. Jennings said. Please leave. Carrying a few boxes, Ethan and his mother walked miserably out the door. As they passed me, Ethan stopped for a moment, looked up, and gave me one last look. In his eyes, there was regret, pain, and a faint glimmer of resentment. I, without a word, turned my head away coldly. They walked out the grand doors under the curious stares and whispers of the neighbors. The heavy iron gate slowly closed behind them, bringing an end to the darkest chapter of my life. After Ethan and his mother were expelled, the spacious penthouse fell strangely silent. But it wasn't peace, it was a cold emptiness. Carol's expensive perfume, Ethan's loud TV, it was all gone. In the living room, amidst the remnants of their hasty departure, only my father and I remained. My father came over and put a hand on my shoulder. It's all over now, sweetheart. I nodded, but I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. I wasn't crying out of pity for them, but for myself. I was crying for 5 years of wasted youth, for a faith that had been brutally trampled. I was wrong, wasn't I, Dad? I sobbed. I was so stupid to believe in him. My father hugged me. No, you weren't wrong, you were just too good. The fault isn't in you, but in the inscrutable hearts of people. Stop crying now, this will be an expensive lesson for you. Be strong, my girl. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The image of Ethan, his desperate look as he was thrown out, haunted me. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a vague sadness. If only he hadn't been so greedy, if he had known how to cherish what he had, maybe we wouldn't have come to this tragic end. For the next few days, I stayed in the penthouse alone. My father, after settling everything, had to fly back to Dubai for work. He said I needed a quiet space to think and heal. The news that Ethan Miller's family had been kicked out of the penthouse spread quickly. Neighbors, friends, everyone was talking about it. The truth about my father's faked bankruptcy and Ethan's scam also gradually came to light. People no longer saw me as a poor wife abandoned by her husband. Instead, they looked at me with respect and a hint of awe. A few days later, I got a call from an old friend who worked at the same company as Ethan. Sophia, have you heard the news? Her voice was full of excitement. Your ex-husband Ethan got fired. I was a little surprised. According to her, after the scandal, Ethan's reputation was in ruins. No company would trust a senior position to someone who had tried to scam his own in-laws. His company, under pressure from public opinion and likely with a little nudge from my father's connections, made the swift decision to let him go. And that's not all, my friend continued. I heard his mom, after the shock of being kicked out, was hospitalized and has now moved to the countryside. They say she's in a really bad way. It's truly karma. I listened to her words but felt nothing. It was the price they had to pay for their greed and malice. I thought our story would end there, that we would each go our separate ways and never meet again. But I was wrong. About a week later, late at night, as I was getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang. I looked at the intercom screen and my heart stopped. It was Ethan. He was standing under the dim yellow light of the entryway. He looked truly miserable. His impeccable suit had been replaced by a wrinkled shirt. His hair, always neat, was a mess. His face was gaunt, his beard unshaven, and his eyes were red and swollen as if he hadn't slept in days. He was no longer the arrogant, confident executive. He was just a failure, a nobody. I didn't want to open the door, but seeing his pathetic state, the last shred of compassion I had left stirred. I opened the door slightly. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. He didn't answer. He just looked at me and suddenly dropped to his knees. "Sophia, I'm sorry," he cried. It was the heart-wrenching sob of a man who had lost everything. "I was wrong, Sophia. I was so wrong. Greed blinded me. I was an animal, human trash. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I just wanted to see you one last time to tell you I'm sorry." He remained kneeling, his head on the floor, his broad shoulders shaking with sobs. I stood there, looking at him. My heart was a whirlwind of emotions. I hated him for what he had done to me and my family. But seeing his miserable state, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pity. After all, this was the man I once loved. "Get up." My voice softened slightly. "It's all over." "No." He shook his head. "It's not over until you tell me you forgive me. Sophia, I know it's impossible, but please, couldn't you give me one more chance? A chance to start over? I promise. I'll change. I'll find another job. I'll work hard and pay you back for everything. Couldn't we start over? Start over." I was stunned. How could he say something like that after everything that had happened? I smiled bitterly. "Start over, Ethan? Do you think everything can just go back to the way it was? Can you put a shattered mirror back together? My trust, you smashed it to pieces yourself." I looked him straight in the eye. "Ethan, you know what? What hurt me the most wasn't you scamming me out of my house. It was you mercilessly insulting my father. When my father was at his lowest, you trampled on his pride. That's something I will never forget." He lowered his head, unable to argue. "You were wrong," I continued clearly, "but your biggest mistake wasn't greed. It was your failure to be grateful. You had everything. A wife who loved you, in-laws who supported you unconditionally, and a brilliant future. But you threw it all away. You discarded a gold mine for a lump of coal. That was your greatest stupidity." My words were like a dagger, sinking deep into his pride. He stopped crying and just sat there, stunned. "Leave." My voice was tired. "We have nothing more to talk about. Don't come looking for me again. Just live your life." With that, I shut the door. I didn't look back once. I leaned against the door and started crying again. But this time, they weren't tears of anger. They were the last tears to say goodbye to a love, to close a sad chapter of my life. The price of betrayal wasn't just material loss, it was the collapse of character, a guilty conscience, and a loneliness that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Ethan paid too high a price, and I, too, learned a lesson I would never forget. After that final encounter, Ethan never appeared before me again. I heard he left the city and went back to his hometown with his mother, no company, no house, and a bleak future. He and his mother had to start from scratch, living amidst the scorn and criticism of relatives and neighbors. It was a bitter, but absolutely deserved, end for what they had done. As for me, after such a major blow, I didn't rush into a new relationship. I took time for myself to heal my internal wounds. The spacious penthouse, which held both happiness and tragedy, became my serene space to find my footing again. I sold half of the expensive but cold furniture and filled the space with green plants and works of art. I made it a real home, my own space. My father, after teaching his treacherous son-in-law a lesson, no longer pressured me to join the family business. "Sweetheart," he told me, "you've been through enough storms. Now do what you truly love. Dad will always be here to support you." And so, I returned to my passion, architecture. But this time, I didn't work for a large corporation. I started my own small design studio, specializing in social impact projects, building homes for the underprivileged, designing schools for children in rural areas, creating green buildings. I wanted to use my talent not just to build impersonal structures, but to create value for society. The intense work and travel to new places helped me gradually forget the sad past. I met many people, saw different ways of life. I realized that as great as my pain was, it was small compared to other misfortunes in the world. It made me stronger and more compassionate. A few years later, when my design studio was somewhat established, I happened to run into Mark, a friend from college. He was also an architect, and we shared the same ideals and passions. We talked a lot about work and life. With him, I found the empathy and understanding I never had with Ethan. Love knocked on my door again, very gently and naturally, without any calculation. When I decided to get married again, my father asked me, "Are you sure this time?" I smiled and nodded. "Yes, Dad, I'm sure. He's not wealthy like Ethan, nor does he have a guaranteed brilliant future, but he has a sincere heart, and for me, that's now more valuable than anything else." My second wedding wasn't lavish. We invited only family and our closest friends for a small, warm gathering. Instead of an expensive wedding dress, I wore one I designed myself. It was simple, but it held all my love and hope for a normal, peaceful happiness. My story had come to an end. A journey from the pinnacle of happiness to the abyss of betrayal, and back up again to stand on my own 2 feet and find a new peace. It taught me an unforgettable lesson about faith and human values. Love is beautiful, but one should never love blindly. Sacrificing for the one you love is good, but you should never sacrifice your pride and self-worth. And most importantly, never judge a person solely by their sweet words or dazzling appearance. You must watch their actions, especially how they act in your most difficult and trying times. Only after going through a storm can you tell which is a sturdy tree and which is a rotten branch, ready to break at any moment. True happiness isn't an immense fortune or a guaranteed future. Sometimes, happiness is inner peace, being true to yourself and standing beside someone who values you even when you have nothing at all.